My name is Dr. Kevin Pecca. I wanted to make a podcast that exposes people to the true miracles of life and health. All the guests on this show have been specially picked because they bring something positive to the world. They have some of the most amazing and inspiring life stories. These people have a passion for living, healing, and leaving the world better than they found it. There is something inside these people that made them keep fighting through all the tough times, even when people told them it was not possible. They carried on and made their lives beautiful again. And now they are sharing their experiences with the world. This is the Expect Miracles podcast. Enjoy the show. Today on the Expect Miracles podcast, we have a recurring doctor on, Dr. John Stenberg. Dr. John is a Blair Upper Cervical doctor out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Very talented doc. If you're out in that area, please go see him. He's very sound in the upper cervical world. And today we're going to talk about what chiropractic school you should go to, which one would be right for you. There's really no right or wrong answer. We're just going to break down everything so you have options and you can choose for yourself. Dr. John, how are you today?
Good, man. I appreciate you having this conversation because when I went to chiropractic college, I didn't know any of this. I had been to a chiropractor's office one time when I went to school. I'd been adjusted one time, and I knew nothing. I was a totally blank slate, so a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about would be really helpful for me 5 years ago thinking about going to school.
I was in the same boat. Like, I was chiropractically adjusted all my life, but when it came time to school, I had a couple people telling me, oh, you don't want to go to that school. They don't have philosophy there. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. So I'm just going to go where I want to go. And I chose the warm weather, and that's how I ended up in Cal. Oh, and my cousin went there too, which was a huge factor. Yeah. So we're great we're doing this episode because I don't think many people break it down. John, where did you go to school?
I went to Life University. That's in Marietta, Georgia. So in the metro Atlanta area, northwest of downtown Atlanta. And that school opened, I think, in the mid-'70s, sort of an offshoot of Palmer and some of those types of philosophy-based schools. Dr. Sid Williams started that university, and it's grown to be one of the larger, maybe the largest chiropractic college. And they've got at least one other branch in somewhere in California, I think up in NorCal, might be SoCal. But
so, Dr. John, knowing that you didn't really know much to go off of, what made you pick Life University?
Yeah, so I actually had one friend who was completing his undergraduate, and he was going to go to chiropractic college. So I actually met with him and asked him a few questions about how to do what you're talking about, pick a school and all that. And he went into this whole thing about straights and mixers and all these kind of things that really didn't make any sense. So,
which does play a huge factor. We should definitely get into that.
Yeah, we will. And at the time, though, it was just confusing. So I basically researched top chiropractic, all that kind of stuff, and I went and visited like 4 schools on one weekend. So I just flew around the country, did a day at a bunch of different schools. I went to, Northwestern, which is out in Minnesota. Went to Life University down in Atlanta. I had visited DUville, which is up in Buffalo. And there might have been one other. But basically, I figured I'm going to visit a few that's got to be fairly similar. And once I have a little bit of context for the campus and the area and all that kind of stuff, I'll just make a decision based on that little bit of research. So it's funny because at some of the smaller schools like DUville, they schedule a day and they have someone take you around and show you the classes and all that sort of thing. And at Northwestern, I spent a day with some students and picked their brains about the curriculum and sat in on a class with them and that sort of thing. And then when I went to Life University, they somehow didn't know that I was coming, even though I had a reservation to do a tour on campus and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's more of like an actual college campus feel, right?
Yeah, I'd say so, just in that they have more amenities, more opportunities there. But I showed up and they were actually in between quarters on break, so there was nobody there. So
oh, wow.
The campus was dead, and I was so confused. But I managed to wander my way into the administrative building, and I found someone and said, hey, I'm such and such. I'm supposed to have a tour. So they kind of scrambled, found someone to show me around. And it was interesting because I didn't get to see any classes. I didn't get to meet any students. I basically got a 10-minute walk around campus and some brochures. And so, and I was exhausted from traveling and all that kind of thing. So after the tour, I was a little bit disappointed because it wasn't really what I thought I was going to expect.
Right.
So I just went and sat in the cafeteria and was just kind of thinking about all the stuff, that I experienced over the last couple of days. Something about that campus felt right. I don't really know what it was, and I still don't have a descriptor, but
that's probably one of the best things to go off of.
Yeah, it just kind of felt like the place for me. So I went home, thought a little bit more about it. Didn't take me long to make a decision. And I applied and started as soon as I could, I think at the beginning of the next quarter.
And what people don't realize, I don't think, about chiropractic school is it's kind of easy to get into. It's really not that hard to get into.
Yeah,
when you think about like PT schools and medical schools.
I just had this conversation with a friend of mine. He's an optometrist here in town, Dr. Justin Manning, and we were talking about our experiences. He went to Ohio State University and very competitive to get in, and we were discussing some of the entrance criteria and all that. And I was telling him, in chiropractic college, for better or worse, to make the argument either way, the bar is a little bit lower than some of those other professional programs in terms of entering. And I was describing to him that at the same time I was applying to dental schools, and you had to have X amount of hours of shadowing. You had to have letters of recommendations. There was interviews. There was a DAT exam that you had to pass just to apply. And I told him I sent my like $250 with an application, and 3 weeks later got accepted.
Yeah, it's kind of baffling.
I thought, okay, I guess this is how it works, but I'm in, so let's.
Do you think that's because it's almost like most chiropractic schools are self-funded, whereas if you go to PT school or medical school, they have all these grants, and like you can go to the University of Arizona physical therapy school, I'm sure, that has a ton of money, where chiropractic schools really aren't in the mainstream college campuses?
I think that might have something to do with it. I think more than anything, it's about volume. Let's get as many people in here as we can. That may or may not be a good thing. A bunch of the students that started with me that quarter never saw the end of their first year. So I think it's important that if you're considering doing a doctorate level
very good point.
If you're considering doing a doctorate level education, the standards to get in are one thing, but what it's going to take to actually see the program through and have the training to get licensed and take care of folks, that's a different thing altogether. So I think in a lot of ways,
absolutely,
those entrance requirements being low is a little bit deceptive, because it's a hell of a lot of work to get through the program and to maintain good grades and to actually keep your head above water. And so I'd encourage anybody who's looking at the requirements and say, man, I've got a B average. I took these classes. I can do this. I mean, really connect with some doctors and some students and learn about the reality of what the program's like, because it was different than I anticipated based on just those entrants.
Absolutely. And a good example of that is, I remember my first day of school, I sat next to this kid that got into school, no problem. He never took an anatomy class. Mm-hmm. Never. Right. And we were in anatomy. He had no clue what was going on. And unfortunately, he did not last more than 2 or 3 weeks. And he paid his money. I'm not sure if he got all of it back, but so yeah, it is easy to get in, but you definitely have to do your due diligence to stay there, because it could be a very quick ride for you.
No doubt about it. And this is an important thing what to do before you go to chiropractic college, right? And that's get a biology degree, basically study in a pre-med program that's going to give you a really good background in anatomy and physiology and healthcare terminology and that kind of thing. So you're not having to learn the language of how we talk about things in healthcare while you're.
Those kids start off flying.
Along with that, I didn't know this until after the fact, but you don't need a bachelor's degree to apply to chiropractic college in a lot of places.
Absolutely. My friend went that route.
There's some states where you don't even need it to get a license. So
yeah,
that's another thing to consider. If you're looking at those requirements, you can start that program without finishing your bachelor's degree and complete it along with your chiropractic. Save yourself some time and money in undergraduate and get right to work. That's something I wish I had known, because I would have definitely done that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I took about your bare minimum science courses that you needed to take to get into school, while others had pre-med degrees and exercise phys degrees. And I was kind of intimidated the first 3 months, because a lot of the stuff was new for me. And these kids just they knew what was going on. They knew what they talked about. Now, when that's over, it's a different story when you start learning the chiropractic stuff, but it's very beneficial if you have that under your belt, just to hit the ground running faster.
Yeah, I mean, it's not by any stretch of the imagination an absolute requirement, right? There's a lot of folks that were in our class it was second careers, right? They had worked in another totally unrelated field and made a switch to chiropractic. And so they were having to play catch up. So obviously stack the deck in your favor, because you want to be able to succeed early and gain momentum and make sure that you're keeping up with the load of coursework. Because the sheer volume of classes and work is going to be much different than anything done as a undergraduate. So do everything you can to prepare, but at the same time, if you don't necessarily have all those ducks in a row, doesn't mean you can't.
Absolutely. And you just brought up another good point. My chiropractic class, which I'm sure was very similar to yours, but yours was probably way bigger, the age range was pretty phenomenal. It was 20s, 30s, 40s. We had people in their 50s, like doing a career change. Like, it is never too late. If you think you're out of time and it's impossible, it's never really too late to make the switch.
No, it's not. But I think one thing to consider is the opportunity cost, right? So if you're at 50 years old and you're thinking about making a switch, you also need to understand you're going to invest several $100,000 in that education. And you need to understand what your career trajectory is going to look like, and if that's return on investment that you want to make. That's another thing that a lot of folks don't talk about with that is really expensive, right? And you need to know that if you're going to make that investment, it's only an investment if there's a return, right? Otherwise, it's an expense.
You're dumping money into a pit.
Deep into the cost to understand what it's going to cost for you to live, in the area around there.
Yeah.
Being in LA, being in Atlanta, I mean, the cost of living is not the same as it is in, say, where NYCC is in rural New York, right? It's a lower cost of living. So all those different factors influence how much coursework you can take. Your quality of life is going to be in terms of outside of school, your living expenses, and there's folks that need to take jobs and do that kind of thing and go at a slower pace to be able to make it. But
absolutely,
those are all things to consider that outside of just getting into school and starting in the coursework. That's all things that affect how well you can do it.
And if you are going to make that career change, it might be wiser to select a school that's local so you don't have to move out of your place, and maybe you can work part-time at the job you're still at. So that could definitely cut down on the cost of living and saving some money.
No doubt.
Dr. John, let's get into what is a mixer and what is a straight chiropractor, because this does play into where you might want to go to school.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that terminology is outdated, and I don't mean it in a way that it doesn't have a context, but I think the way that it was developed doesn't necessarily make sense today. So historically speaking, the straight chiropractors are the ones that would operate within the traditional philosophical constructs of chiropractic, maintain sort of a conservative, subluxation-oriented practice focus. And the mixers would be the ones that were sort of on the more of the musculoskeletal pain specialty kind of thing. And so with that, there are various...
Which are very valid now, which people need to see too.
Right. It's not a right or a wrong conversation. And
which I think it used to be.
There are differences in perspectives and philosophies, application, and ultimately there's patients that are going to be best suited towards those different styles of practice. But from an educational perspective, the schools tend to be leaning more one way or the other.
Not too much middle ground.
And I think that even within the campus setting, there's shades of gray with that. So I went to a school that was more on the traditionally straight side of things, more philosophically focused, but it doesn't mean that everybody on campus was excited about that. It doesn't mean that that's all we ever talked about. It doesn't mean that we have animosity towards people that practice other ways. Speaking for myself, there are people like that. But if you think about the bell curve, and eliminate the extremes, most of us within the standard sort of bell curve there, we try not to talk down about how anybody else views things because it's beneficial at the right time and place.
So what does that mean that the straight chiropractors focus more specifically on the adjustment rather than soft tissue work and other maybe modalities like stim and all that? What does that really mean?
I think, at least for me, and this is just me sharing my own opinion, I think that sort of the mentality and the philosophy that you approach patient care is the difference. So on the quote unquote straight side of things, we always sort of approach a situation understanding that the body is a self-healing organism, that the body is intelligent, the body knows what it needs and has the capabilities to heal and grow and continue to adapt to changes in its environment when it's functioning properly. And so we always want to work with that. So our orientation and our focus and the entity that we're most fixated on is health. And on the opposite side of the spectrum would be folks that are focused on the problem or focused on the disease or focused on the issue, the dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And so the differences are going to be, we want to support healing and health, and we want to eliminate structural problems that interfere with that process, as opposed to we want to use spinal manipulation and a variety of other treatments to alleviate musculoskeletal pain, right? So again, just differences in philosophy. And so what that means is how you manage patients and how you kind of view problems is going to be applied through that lens, right? So someone who's got a frozen shoulder if you go see a quote unquote straight chiropractor, they're going to say, okay, we understand that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating organism. You've got a secondary condition or you've got a problem with your shoulder. We could treat the shoulder and try to alleviate that. Or we can look at the big picture and say, why is that shoulder dysfunctional compared to the other? What is it that's making the body not able to fix that problem on its own? We're going to primarily focus our attention to the spine. We're going to look for issues there, and we're going to focus our attention on correcting those issues in the spine. Now, whether or not that 100% heals and corrects the shoulder, the spinal-related issues are the primary concern. And so within certain limitations, a lot of that stuff is going to heal and go away on its own. But if it doesn't, you still have full benefit of the care. Whereas on the musculoskeletal sort of mixer side of the profession, all the focus and attention is going to be on how do we increase the range of motion with the shoulder? How do we improve the function there? We may or may not incorporate spinal adjustments in that, but primarily the focus is going to be on alleviating that symptom and removing that symptom.
Absolutely. And what we're finding clinically now, I'm sure you find it a lot in your office, they do work well with certain patients together. So like you said, if we treat the spinal, the bone out of place, the structural problem of the patient, and we clear it up, we'll say that shoulder gets 80, sometimes it gets 100% better. Let's say it gets 75, 80% better, and there's still some lingering muscle issues. I have absolutely no problem sending them over to a musculoskeletal specialist or someone that's like maybe a sports chiropractor that does a lot of soft tissue work. They can take away that other 20% of the problem to help facilitate that healing once we get everything else stabilized.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of priorities and identifying when you're working with a patient based on your training, the best available literature and evidence, and the patient's goals. That's evidence-based care, establishing priorities for what is the best use of their time and money from a healthcare perspective in a chiropractor's office. And so based on that, there are going to be a variety of different perspectives and priorities. And
absolutely, yeah.
If someone's doing conservative targeted care and they have goals and they're using objective testing to measure progress, I'd say either way is going to be up to the doctor and patient to decide what's best for them.
Absolutely. And so, Dr. John, we kind of both went different routes in chiropractic school. Like we said, there's not a lot of middle ground. Your school was definitely a straight school, heavily oriented on just the philosophy and the structural aspects. Not to say it doesn't have the other side, but your school is known for philosophical, structurally based chiropractic school. My school was definitely way on the other side of the spectrum, where what you kind of talked about was if there's a shoulder issues, they're looking at the shoulder, they're using modalities, they're doing a lot of soft tissue work. They don't believe that bones can move out of place. I've had several interesting conversations with the teachers that I ended up stop having because it would turn out into a full-blown argument and it just wasn't worth anybody's time.
Yeah.
So definitely when I got to school, like there was no upper cervical talk. When somebody said adjust C1, people would literally start laughing. I got laughed at for practicing toggle recoil in the adjusting room, and it was not easy. You definitely have to be philosophically sound in what you're doing if you're going to go to a quote unquote mixer school. Now, not to say it's impossible. If you do go to a school that is evidence-based, I'm sure there's a lot of good philosophically based chiropractors in the area that you could actually learn from while you're going to those schools. And that's exactly what I did. I was pretty much in an upper cervical office once or twice a week just to learn the technique because I wasn't getting any of that at school like you were.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple important points to go along with that. Number one is the school setting tends to be so intense because you're studying so hard and everybody's stressed out and you're working like crazy that a lot of these arguments and conversations get just out of hand and they're not productive. So I would say if you're in school, keep an open mind. I would also keep your BS meter on high alert because there's going to be a lot of people coming through with a lot of wacky ideas. Really need to look for consistent principles you can observe and apply. But I think keep an open mind and let the results speak for themselves, right? And I think
absolutely
that's one thing that I really appreciated about not having a chiropractic background going into school is I really kind of took everything at face value and weighed it all equally. And then based on results and as my education progressed, started to weed out the things that didn't really fit with my values and my perspectives in the way that I see myself practicing. But at the same time, there were times where I was one of those idiots that got involved in those conversations and were making unqualified statements just based on what I heard someone in a technique seminar say. You really don't know anything in school.
Absolutely.
So you should keep an open mind and a look at a lot of different perspectives, because any one school isn't going to give you everything that you need. And so I think that what you did was the right thing to do, is spend some time outside of the clinical academic setting, spend some time with doctors in the field and see what the day-to-day is like in different types of offices, because in a lot of ways, even in the clinic at school, it's just way far removed from the reality of.
Absolutely. And you definitely got to do what feels right for you. There's over 200 chiropractic techniques, and some people walk into school and they know exactly what they're doing on day one. Others are kind of floating around. And what you said, you kind of said it perfectly. Have your BS meter going, but also be open to techniques, because there are some wild chiropractic techniques that look really strange, but they are very effective. Like, for instance, my buddy, Dr. Ben Benuis, I had on this podcast. He's a NSA doctor.
Yeah.
If you look at that technique from afar, you are going to look and say, what was that? That looks like total BS. What's going on? And he is getting amazing results in his office. He was like the only kid in class that kind of was like, what's going on here? I want to look further into it. Everybody else kind of dismissed it. He's doing phenomenal work because it really resonated with him. And I think that's huge when you want to pick what you kind of want to do after school or during school.
Yeah. And like I said, I talked to other healthcare providers. I spent a few hours with a TMJ specialist here in town. She's a dentist. I interviewed Dr. Justin Manning. He's an optometrist this morning. And we had these same conversations where there are a lot of different unique ways to focus in any healthcare field, right? And so there's room for everybody, as long as you're doing quality work, you have high integrity, and you're conservatively providing good care to patients. There's room for all of it. When it comes down to consistent principles, those are the things that you want to look for. There's going to be stuff that comes up on the fringes, and some people just like to be on the fringes, and that's okay. But for me, I tend to be more analytical, tend to be a little bit more wanting to see data, to back stuff up. Yeah. Just knowing myself, I tend to gravitate towards things that incorporate that as a routine part of the care. So you got to be self-aware. You got to know what your values are. You got to keep an open mind and evaluate a lot of different things. And even if you don't end up using all of that stuff in your practice, it's going to increase your perspective. So when you're managing patients and you're seeing that not everything is solved with one particular intervention or approach, it's important to have other things in the back of your mind to evaluate and say, you know what, we've gotten you to a certain point. You could use this other thing to kind of tie up some loose ends, or, my approach is the right thing for you, but here's another perspective to consider, rather than giving up on chiropractic care altogether and all that sort of thing. So I think a lot of ways that open-mindedness doesn't mean that you have to accept everything, but you just take it in, you weigh it, and you make decisions based on your values.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. John, knowing what we know now, we are upper cervical chiropractors. We have graduated. We really didn't know much about the field when we started. What are the best options for people that are going into chiropractic school? They've had their own personal experiences with upper cervical. If they like it, they want to go for it. What can be their next step to a good upper cervically sound chiropractic school? There's a couple good options.
Yeah, I think Life University in Atlanta, where I went to school, is probably your best option. And it's not the best school for everything, but I will say this, being in Atlanta, you have a lot of opportunities to be exposed to a lot of different types of approaches and techniques. I took at least 3 different upper cervical techniques as a part of
That's amazing.
My elective courses. So I was able to evaluate, outside of all the other adjustment techniques we learned, those 3 specifically. And there were countless seminars that came through town because it was such a big hub and a big city and really accessible. So I think that would be at the top of the list. I think Sherman College of Chiropractic is in Spartanburg, South Carolina. They're in the East Coast. They've got a really strong upper cervical presence from what I've gathered in clubs.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing.
They're always hosting seminars. One good thing about Sherman is it's relatively close to Life University. So it's like a 3-hour drive. So even if you're there and there's something that you want to get into at Life, we would have kids from Sherman come down all the time for seminars and vice versa. So
yeah, very true.
With those 2, you almost kind of get the accessibility of both. So that's something to consider. But other than that, Life West on the satellite campus on the West Coast, that's another good option.
Probably West Coast. I would say that's your best option.
Especially for Blair. They've got a really
upper
strong
cervical
presence there. And then the Palmer campuses, from what I understand, have somewhat of an upper cervical presence. I know Dr. Todd Hubbard, who's a great Blair.
Oh, you're going to get a good understanding of Blair for him.
He's on
Definitely.
staff there. You can actually use Blair in their clinic system. So a lot of these things that you learn, you may or may not be able to practice on campus in the clinics. So that's another thing to consider when you're looking at those techniques and learning them, is how you can use them as a part of your education. And then other than that, I think few and far between in the U.S. are schools that have the opportunity to learn upper cervical care as a part of your curriculum.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that being said, I think we were talking about it before. Parker, I think they have a pretty solid club there where it might not be in the clinic or the curriculum, but there are students that are active and have a hunger for learning the upper cervical technique, which is good.
And for what it's worth, if you're at another school, if you're at Logan or NYCC or Northwestern, you can start an upper cervical club. There are doctors that travel all over the country to teach and engage with students, and you can have ways to access those resources wherever you are. You don't have to be at one of these schools. I know Dr. Bulow, for example, you've had him on the podcast.
He'll go anywhere.
He'll go anywhere and everywhere, and I love it, and that's great. So if you've got the motivation and you're really passionate about this kind of thing, you can make it work wherever you are. And that was more or less your experience.
That is a huge point. You can make this work at any chiropractic school you want to go to. We were talking about it before. The first year and a half, maybe even 2 years, is strictly book work anyway. So everybody's kind of got to get through the same thing before you could even start exploring these avenues.
Right. The way the curriculum is structured, which is a good thing to talk about, it is more or less based on the board testing system. So to be a licensed chiropractor in any state to practice, you have to have passed 4 parts of a national board exam. The first part of that board exam is the basic sciences. And so you essentially spend the first 6 quarters, year and a half of school becoming really knowledgeable and proficient in the basic sciences. And after you pass that first part of your board exams, things start to turn to more of the clinical work and more of the chiropractic focused stuff. But that's essentially your scientific foundation for everything else that you're going to learn. So that's a huge part of the initial, like you said, year and a half of the program.
Absolutely.
It can really bog you down because there's really not much hands-on learning. There's not much chiropractic technique that you're learning, in which case being involved in clubs and doing some seminars really keeps you fired up, because otherwise you can really get bogged down.
Absolutely. Although my school didn't have a strong upper cervical presence, they were phenomenal at getting you through the boards and passing you through that, which the end result, that's really what it's all about. Because if you can't pass the boards, then you're not going to be chiropractic.
It doesn't matter what you know, right? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm sure that goes with a lot of the other schools. I mean, listen, you need to get into chiropractic school. You need to pick a location that's going to be right for you. You got to pick something that's going to be financially right for you. And you need to get the piece of paper that is the degree. That's pretty much what you need.
Yeah, they're going to have the same base curriculum, which is geared towards that CCE, or Council on Chiropractic Education, standards. And those standards are what are preparing you for the board exams, and you need the board exams to get a license. So you're exactly right. In a lot of ways, a chiropractic college is getting you to the point of licensure, and is getting you to be qualified as safe, as knowledgeable, as efficient, as meeting certain standards, both clinically and academically, to be safe out there in the general population, taking care of people. But one thing that we used to have assemblies weekly or a couple times a quarter at Life University, where you would basically go listen to a speaker, you got a credit for it, and everybody would gather in the gym and do that kind of thing. And I remember we had a doctor, Arnaud Bernier, was there talking one time, and he had gone to Sherman College, like back when they were really hardcore and straight philosophy, and learned from some, legends in chiropractic. And he was talking about when you're doing that, like we're talking about, a lot of the curriculum is really oriented towards the testing. It's not as applicable to your day-to-day practice.
100%.
So he encouraged us to make for yourself a parallel curriculum. And this is learning philosophy, focusing on different types of techniques and things like that, and dedicating time and resources outside of what you do as a part of your normal coursework to learn some of that stuff. Because if you just wait for it to show up,
that's a good point.
At some point in your education, you're going to be disappointed, and you're really going to miss out on a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good point. So if you were into upper cervical and you were just like, you know what, I'm just going to focus on getting my education, getting the piece of paper, and then I'm going to graduate, it's going to take you some time after you graduate to really get the technique down, and you're not going to be ready to go for a while. So that parallel curriculum of getting what you need to have done and also knowing what you want to do at the same time is, you want to kind of have converge at one point, because it's really nice to be ready to go after you graduate. And it's tough upper cervically if you're not.
Yeah, and it's really going to force you to prioritize your time, right? Because you're going to have a lot of demands. I mean, we're talking, I think we took upwards of 30-some credits in a 10-week quarter. So you're talking 60, 70 hours of coursework on top of clinic, on top of studying and all that sort of thing. So you're really spread thin. And so you have to prioritize and manage your time really well if you're going to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's a really important thing to do anyway, but I just know that's going to create there's going to be some sacrifices in other areas of your life to be able to.
Oh, absolutely. This might be one of the most important things on my list is find a mentor. Find somebody that's doing exactly what you want to do and do everything that they do and make it your own at the same time. Because in the upper cervical world, we see some very extreme, difficult cases that I personally, I still struggle with some really bizarre cases I've never seen before. You have to have a couple doctors on speed dial to send the x-rays, get their advice. Have you ever seen this before? Because that in turn can help that patient. And I've had so many cases where I didn't know what to do at some points. And I would hit up Dr. Liz Hafer or Dr. Hall or Dr. Buo. And they've given me so much valid pieces of information to help that patient that you need that to succeed.
Yeah. And all those docs you mentioned and a bunch of others, they're very willing to help students out and doctors out. It's not like they're inaccessible or they're not open to collaboration. They love it and they're very open to that. So it's, if you don't take advantage, you're only, doing a disservice to yourself and your patients. And I think there's within those few that you mentioned, I know Dr. Meg Banich is
Dr. Banich was like, I can't believe I didn't say that name. She was probably the biggest influence ever on me. So, 70 years worth of combined clinical experience that you have to tap into there. And that's really, really valuable. It's invaluable. And so when you think about that, and this is my perspective, you're unlikely to find those types of mentors on campus. I think that people who are teaching in chiropractic colleges are very disconnected from the reality of chiropractic in the field. And that's not a knock on them, but that world is so condensed. And so got so much other stuff to worry about, like getting students credits and all this stuff. It's not really clinically, not really the real world.
Yeah, they're just disconnected, right? And so I think that's important to go. You can have those mentors on campus, but it's important to go outside, as well. And Dr. Charmaine Herman, who teaches on campus at Life, if it wasn't for her coming in from the outside and being engaged in chiropractic curriculum and education and mentoring students, I would have never known about Blair Chiropractic. I would have never been a Blair patient, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So folks like her and Dr. Chris Lee, if you're in Atlanta, they're two great Blair doctors in the area that are also very open and welcoming, are great resources. So if you don't know who those folks are in your area, you can reach out to someone who's practicing upper cervical and say, hey, I'm a student at such and such college. I want to learn a little bit about what this is all about. And who do you know around here that I can connect with? There's someone near every school that would be open and willing to do that.
Absolutely. And so, Dr. John, a thought popped in my head, but I might want to make this an entirely different episode, like how to open your own practice out of school, because we both kind of did that. I think that's a whole conversation in itself.
That deserves at least an hour.
We'll definitely do that another time. Dr. John, any final thoughts on what people can do to pick a chiropractic school that's right for them, or any advice for students currently in school?
Two different things, I guess. If you're preparing to go ahead of time, I would definitely spend some time in offices before you get to school. Because one of the things that's going to happen is you get so far along in school and you get in so deep and you get in over your head, that a lot of times it's easy to just keep going because it's what you're doing. And I graduated with friends who are already out of practice and selling insurance and working other jobs and doing different things. So you just spent 4 years of your life and $250,000 to get this degree, and it's useless to you, right? So you really need to know, number one, this is what I am supposed to do, not what I think I can do or what I want to do or seems like a good job. But especially with the type of work we do, you really have to have almost a calling to it in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'd say, really be sure about what you're doing. And I can think of one student who actually in our first upper cervical class was the end of the fourth quarter, and he would always have this talk at the end of the class, Dr. Franz. And it was basically this conversation. He's like, look, you guys are in it far enough now that you need to really look within yourself and be honest about, is this the right thing for me? Like, should I see this through and then go into the field and do it? Or am I maybe a little bit off track? And if you are, that's okay, but you need to know before you get it over your head. And I remember a friend who was sitting in front of me at school. He didn't show up the next quarter. And I talked with him about it after the fact. And he's like, that really impacted me. My dad was a chiropractor. My uncle's a chiropractor. I just went because I thought I should, and I thought it would be a good career. And he's like, it just wasn't for me. And when I did that, when I was introspective about it, I figured, he's right. He's off doing something else, and he's thriving.
Good for him.
And I'm like, that's awesome, man. You did the right thing. Those people that go all the way through, they struggle and they never really get it, why we're doing chiropractic and what it's all about. And I feel bad for those guys because it becomes very hard to do the things that we're doing, especially if you started practice, you're new into practice, all that kind of thing. Like, you really have to have a strong sense of purpose in this to sustain you.
If you don't know why you're doing it, it's going to turn into any other 9-to-5 job. You're going to hate waking up. You're going to hate going to work. You got to know why you're doing this. It's amazing that you can actually change other people's lives with your hands. Isn't it crazy?
It is. And to come full circle back to the sort of the entrance requirements and that sort of thing, I mean, don't go to chiropractic college because you couldn't get into PT school. Don't go to chiropractic college because your grades weren't good enough to go to med school and you can be a doctor by doing this. I mean, it's a disservice to you. It's a disservice to your community and your patients. There's too many folks like that out in our field. And I think that we're reaping the benefits of that type of approach in the way that, our communities view us and our status in the culture. So, I think it's really important. And if you have to take a break, if you have to take a year between undergraduate, if you need it, don't rush into it. Don't rush through it. Make sure that it's, it's going to be an investment for your life rather than, just the next step in your academic career.
Perfectly said, Dr. John. Dr. John, where can people find you on social media and your website and all that?
Yeah, my practice is called Zenith Chiropractic. I'm in Colorado Springs, so on social media, Zenith Chiropractic, Zenith Chiro on Instagram. I host a podcast called Thrive for the Cause, COS, short for Colorado Springs. So we have conversations with folks in the community here about all kinds of different things. And so you can also check that out as well. And if you find me online at zenithchiroco.com, if you hear this and want to have more information or you have questions or things like that, connect with me through there. Send me an email. We'd be happy to chat with you and answer any specific questions. If you're a student in school and you're trying to figure out next steps, we can help you navigate that. If you're thinking about going to school and you have more questions, we can help you navigate that. But I appreciate you, Kevin, for asking me to do this because I think it's a really important conversation. It's one that I didn't have before I went to school, so I think it's very valuable.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. Dr. John, thank you for so much coming on. Maybe next episode we'll talk about how to start building your own practice after school.
Right on. That'd be a good one.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, subscribe, give us 5 stars, and leave a review. It really helps boost the podcast and spread the good word. My chiropractic practice is located in West Orange, New Jersey at Montclair Upper Cervical Chiropractic. You can also find us on Facebook at Montclair Upper Cervical Chiropractic. All of my information is on my website at drkevinpecca.com, drkevinpecca.com. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Dr. Kevin Pecca for podcast episodes, patient testimonials, and educational videos. I have daily affirmations and inspirational quotes on Instagram at Easel Affirmations, EASEL Affirmations. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at drkevinpecca@gmail.com, drkevinpecca@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Cheers.